This week I would like to speak about Lag Boimer a little bit, and also to clarify some of the concepts that we spoke about last week. Make it a bit more simpler for people to follow. First of all, just a little bit about Lag Boimer B'chlal, and there's the reason for the Simcha on Lag Boimer. So you have what's brought down in Shulchan Aruch, has brought down the reason that on Lag Boimer the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped Poskel Amos. They stopped passing away on that day. Which basically the reason why the days of Sfir in general are days of mourning is because of the fact that Rabbi Akiva's students passed away, so that's why they don't take haircuts and they don't get married, etc. And they passed away in this time between Pesach and Shavuot. And the day of Lag Boimer, they stopped passing away, so therefore it's a day when there's not noyeg any avelis. Now the Rebbe brings two opinions from what time does this, from when on Lag Boimer itself don't you have any avelis? When you're allowed to take haircuts and have chasnas? One opinion holds that you have to wait until part of the day of Lag Boimer itself passes, which means you have to wait until Lag Boimer in the morning, a little bit after sunlight. So then, since in Avelos, you have halacha mitzvah sayem kekulei. You have an halacha that when it comes to, let's say, the last day of Avelos, so the part of the day is like the whole day, it's considered like a whole day. So therefore, even though the Alter Rebbe writes on Lag Boimer, from one hand, the last few students of Rabbi Akiva passed away. But that was the day that it stopped, it was over. So therefore, from one hand, you have to be noyeg Avelos. So you noyeg Avelos a little bit, the first, beginning of daylight, noyeg Avelos. But then the rest of the day, since it's a day of Simcha, because the students start passing away, so therefore, mitzad Avelos, you say mitzvah sayem kekulei. The part of the day is like the whole day, and the rest of the day is mutter. Other people say that the Avelos already stops from the night of Lag Boimer. The night going into Lag Boimer, one is allowed to take haircuts and have chasanas, etc. Depending upon this, Alter Rebbe says will make a difference whether you say Tachanun and the Mincha preceding Lag Boimer. If you say that the Lag Boimer itself by night is still Noyeg Avelos, and even on the day of Lag Boimer, the beginning of the day is Noyeg Avelos, so then obviously there's no point in not saying Tachanun to Mincha before. But if the Simcha of Lag Boimer already starts by night, so then already from the Mincha before, it's the Mincha right before, like the Mincha right before Shabbos, right before Yom Tov, Reish Chodesh, you don't say Tachanun. So the Mincha right before Lag Boimer, you also wouldn't say Tachanun, because the night of Lag Boimer, according to this opinion, already is a Yom Simcha, so the Mincha before already affects the Mincha before. So B'negei L'Poyel, the Alter Rebbe just left it, I guess, to the Mekoyim Shenoigim, whatever the Minig HaMokim is. But in the Siddur, the Alter Rebbe paskins that from Mincha before Lag Boimer you don't say Tachanun, which seems to imply that he accepts the opinion in the Siddur that the Simcha of Lag Boimer starts from the night going into Lag Boimer already. Now, the reason, I think the accepted understanding of why this is because the reason in Halacha why Lag Boimer is the day of Simcha is because that is the day that the students stop passing away. That's why it's the day of Simcha, and they don't say Tachanun v'chulu. There is a bit of Avelos also pi Halacha according to the first opinion, because some students passed away by night. I guess according to the opinions that say that Lag Boimer, the night of Lag Boimer, you could take haircuts. Maybe they hold that already by night, whatever what the svar is. But at any rate, but this is all Api Nigla. The reason is mitzad that Poskel Amos they stop passing away at that day. However, Api Kabbalah, Api Chassidus, the reason the Simcha of Lag Boimer is a whole different dimension. The reason of the Simcha of Lag Boimer is because that is the day of the passing of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And he said that on his day of his passing, for him was a great Simcha, and he said that they should be happy in that day. And as the Rebbe would always mention the story that was one of the students of the Arizal, Rabbi Avraham HaLevi, the Arizal said on him that he was a psenitzos or a gilgul from Yirmiyahu HaNavi. He would always mourn on the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, and would always cry bitterly about the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And at Kedei Kach, he felt so much the Churban Beis HaMikdash that in every day he would say Nachim in Shemona Esrei. He would say what we say in Shemona Esrei, and Nachim, when we say on Tisha B'Av, in the bracha of Bnei Yerushalayim, so he would say Nachim every day. when he came Lag Boimer, the Rizal went up on Lag Boimer to 1 year to Miron, and he came together with him, and he said also Nachim on the day of Lag Boimer. So that Rizal told him that the Rashbi was upset that he said Nachim on the day of his Simcha on Lag Boimer. And that the Rashbi said that because he said Nachim, so he's going to have a punishment, whatever, something that he needed in the Chama for happened. But at any rate, so the Rebbe points out that he would say Nachim even on Shabbos and Yom Tov, depending on whether the Rebbe gives a whole beer. I mean, you don't have a weekday Shemona Esrei in Shabbos and Yom Tov to say Nachim, but maybe in benching. There's a whole answer to the Rebbe about that. But in Inyan, he would have said Nachim even on a Shabbos and Yom Tov. However, that wasn't a problem. When he said Nachim on the day of Lag Boimer, so then he was punished. So Lag Boimer, a certain Simcha, a certain day that is higher than Inyan of Avelos, Mitzad the Simchas Shel Rashbi. So with Api Kabbalah, Api Chassidus, it has a very strong. The Simcha takes on a whole different dimension. That's why Al Pinigla, there's a whole shak of Italian Svarim. What's Taka, the mocker of the Simcha of Lag Boimer, the Chasam Sofer has a famous truth about it. And this is Geworden a ganze Shaila, etc., etc. But nevertheless, Al Pi Kabbalah, it's clear that it's Mitzad Yom Simchas Shel Rashbi. So therefore, since it's Yom Simchas Shel Rashbi, Mitzad that reason, Kamuvan, the Simcha starts already, Mitzad that aspect of it, obviously, the Simcha already starts the night going into Lag Boimer. So Mamela Mitzad Al Pi Shulchan Aruch, there's a difference whether you start by night or by day. But L'chayre Mitzad, the reason why we don't say Tachna, at least has, I guess, is Al Pi Kabbalah is connected very much with Yom Simchas Shel Rashbi. So therefore, I think that's the understanding of why in the Siddur we don't, the Alter Rebbe, I mean, one of the ways we could understand why in the Siddur the Alter Rebbe writes, you don't say Tachna, already the Mincha before, Mitzad this aspect of Lag Boimer, Simchas Shel Rashbi starts already the night before. Now, Elamai, there's only just one ha'ara I would make, that the Rebbe in a letter writes, somebody asked the Rebbe about Chasnas and Lag Boimer. The Rebbe said, the Rebbe was Mitzay into these two opinions of when the Simcha of Lag Boimer starts by night or on the day. The Rebbe says that therefore the Rebbe is noted to say that it's better to do it by day of Lag Boimer and not to do it the night going into Lag Boimer. And these days, B'chlal, whatever the people that want to say, you make chazas on any available time. But I'm saying in that letter, at least the Rebbe, what I'm trying to bring out at least, the Rebbe, even though we hold the Lag Boimer and Simchas Shel Rashbi, the Rebbe still, says, is mitzayim, this halacha, it's still negela halacha to know that there is chilukei deis and certain inyonim of haircuts and marriage, when the chasnas, there is still more of a adifus, it's better advice from the Rebbe also do it by day than the night going into Lag Boimer, because of the halacha, l'kulu yalma, by day itself is a yom simcha. Just one other thing, it's not negei halacha, but it's possible negei havanas and yonim. The famous question that everybody asks, that if the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped passing away on Lag Boimer, it was also the simcha. They all died out, so it's over. So it's not they stopped dying because there was nobody left. So what's the simcha? So the Rebbe learns pshat when you say Paskul Lamos, it means that there were some that Taka remained alive. We Taka say 24 students passed away, but 24,000 students passed away. But some of them, when you say Paskul Lamos, some of them Taka remained. I mean, similarly to the famous Gzeira on the Deir HaMabul, that every year, you'd have a certain amount of Yidden dying in the last year of the 40 years in the desert. So the Gzeira was over. So the last 40 years in the Midbar, the Gzeira was over in the Deir HaMidbar. What happened? So whoever brings down the Taka, the last remaining few thousand that were supposed to pass away this year, Taka didn't pass away. So it's not shot that it was over because there's nobody left to die, but there were some that were remaining. Same thing here. The Rebbe learned the some that were remaining, and the Rebbe gives a whole beer place. The letter that just printed in this week's in the Lahak, which is giving out for this week's Rebbe, the letter to the Rebbe, where the Rebbe writes Api Kabbalah that the Lag Boimer is miskal a certain shame of Rachamim that was spoiled at Paskul Lamos, and the Rebbe explains that must mean that the reason why the whole reason that they passed away in the first place was because they nagu kavod zebazed, they didn't show respect one for another properly. So if we say that they stopped passing away, it must also mean that Lag Boimer not only took away the Gzeira, but it took away the cause that led to the Gzeira, that it was moider by them thinking that they should have covered one for another. So when we say that post-Columbus they stopped dying, that the Alter Rebbe said a few passed away in Lag Boimer, means not that the last remaining few died and it was over, but that some of them will remained alive. Another word is that people say that if Lag Boimer they stop passing away, so why until Shavuos is there Avelos? So I mean, if I remember correctly, I think that people say that it's snapshot that they all passed away in 1 year, from Pesach until Shavuos in 1 year. Because then what Pshat they finished passing away in Lag Boimer. But Olamai was a meshach of a few years that they passed away at that time. The Rebbe has Osicha explaining that, Api Kabbalah Befrat, that the Zman between Pesach and Atzeres is the Zman of Din, whatever it is. It was Moider, because they weren't Noye Kavod Zeh Bozeh, didn't have respect one for another, so it was Moider Dinim on them. So it was that Zman, it came, meshach a few years, and it came to Lag Boimer a certain year and stopped. I think, if I remember correctly, it says somewhere, I hope I'm not making it up. But at any rate, so that's Pnegaya, that prat of Lag Boimer. But at any rate, another prat that is not negated the day of Lag Boimer itself, but in Halacha itself, there is also, there's different days when there's Noyeg Avelos. Everybody holds the 33 days. The question is when you start counting the 33 days. One day holds you start counting the 33 days from the beginning. One opinion holds that you start counting the 33 days from the beginning of Sfira. So therefore, Lag Boimer is the last day of that you're Noyeg Avelos. So you're Noyeg a little bit of Avelos, name Lag Boimer itself, according to the first opinion. From then on, the rest of Sfira, there's no problem, Chasnas, whatever it is. Another opinion holds you start counting Rish Chodesh Shir, a bit different, and you establish Hilchos Sefiras, exactly the dates, whatever. There's a bit of variations in that itself. But Al Koponim, the Poel Mamish Api Kabbalah, it's all the days of Sfira. There's an inyan of Avelos at Snoig, and even the Halacha that Alter Rebbe writes that a person could be Teufus both Chumras together. He could have some. So he could be Noig aside from the beginning of Sfira until Shleishis Me'agbola. But at any rate, just pointing out that in Halacha itself, according to one minig, the way people would do, is that from Lag Boimer and on, the Avelos of Sfira was finished. Anyway, getting back, that's one thing I wanted to mention. There's another inyan of Lag Boimer, which is, it was negated what we mentioned last week, but that's why I want to be madgish, that we learned last week that there was a halacha that if somebody asks you what day is Sfira, you shouldn't say before, if you didn't count Sfira yet, you shouldn't say that today is such and such. Rather, you should say that yesterday was such and such. Famous thing that on Lag Boimer, people, they say tonight is Lag Boimer. They don't even think what they're saying. So it becomes a lot of people were nizar not to be careful not to say tonight is Lag Boimer before they actually daven Ma'ariv, because by saying that it's similar to saying that today is such and such a day in Sfira, which could be a problem. However, a Poel Mamish poskim right that if you said it, it's not a problem because you weren't Bechlal thinking of saying what day in this Omer it is, whatever. I'm just pointing out another aspect of Lag Boimer. Another interesting thing, Negei Lag Boimer, which is part of the whole debate part of the whole discussion that was there, why Lag Boimer is a day of Simcha Bechlal, is that in Iran they make a bonfire and they used to burn. Even today they would take the clothes and expensive clothes and such and burn it, and there became a whole to do that is about Tashchis and Van stammt der Minig in the first place. Where is Bechlal the Simcha coming from? What is this whole thing of burning, wasting money and etc., etc. So that led into the whole controversy of Bechlal. What's the Simcha of Lag Boimer? Who said the Simcha of Lag Boimer justifies, to go to such a thing? So the Gemara and ganze whole to do about it. But the Poel Mamish, the minig was accepted, and the Grace of Tzadikim and the Rebbeim themselves supported the minig. And there's Mekayres, Halach, and there's a whole Kunt Svarim and Kuntresim that discusses this, and things that were published just on the subject to justify that Api Allah is absolutely no problem to do such a thing. And the Rebbe, just one more prat, the Rebbe points out, the Rebbe asks that Api Nigla, even if you're going to say that the Simcha of Lag Boimer is Mitzad the Stakus of Rashbi, but Api Nigla, Atonis, on a day that a tzaddik passes away, it should be a day of mourning, it should be a day of Atonis. So why, fine, you say that Shpi passed away, but why is it a Yom Simcha? Api Kabbalah, you could say, Ichvei, so Maisav, the Hilula, mit Yichudim, Radas, Api Nigla, how do you explain it? The Rebbe says that Al Pi Nigla, it's understood because Rashbi commanded, Rashbi Tziva, the Smoyach B'Yom Simchasi. Rashbi himself was one that said you should be happy in the day of his Simcha. So therefore, Al Pi Nigla, you have to follow what he says, and it says Yom Simcha. Noisiv to the fact that, that Al Pi Kabbalah does, the status of Rashbi, what it accomplished, the Maila, Lamata, V'chulu, V'chulu, and the Chassidus is explained why Moshe Rabbeinu, when he passed away, Zainot is a Yom Tainus. When Rashbi passed away, it's a Yom Simcha. There's a whole beer given that the level that Rashbi was Man Hagolo, so his Estalkus was poil a certain thing. However, Bisman Abayis was a higher level. So then, whatever it might be. But at any rate, that's been the Geya regarding to Lag Boimer. Regarding to getting back to the Hilchos Sefiras Haomer in general, just to recap on some of the things we spoke about last week, is that just for those that got a bit confused, just one general point is the halacha that the Rebbe says that you have to be careful when it comes to the night of Sefiras Haomer. First of all, one thing that I mentioned before is you have to be careful not to say before you count the Sefiras Haomer that tonight is such and such. You should always say that yesterday was such and such. Why? Because if you say tonight and such, it could be like you're counting Sefiras Haomer. The same thing that Rebbe said that if you hear somebody counting Sefiras Haomer, also you have to have kavanah that you don't want to be yotze with his counting. If you wouldn't have in mind not to be yotze with his counting, so then it might be considered that you're yotze with his, that even though you didn't have in mind to be yotze with him saying that tonight is such and such, you're yotze. So just to explain the underlying reason behind this, so there's two underlying principles that are behind this. First of all, there's the subject of the mitzvah striches kavanah or not. When you do a mitzvah, you need to have the intention, you need to be aware that you're fulfilling a mitzvah at the time you're fulfilling a mitzvah. If you're blowing shofar, you're hearing shofar. You have to have intention and be conscious of the way you're hearing it in order to fulfill a mitzvah. You're just hearing it stamazeh. So the Alter Rebbe writes, halachas when it comes to a mitzvah min ha-Torah, like hearing shofar and things like that, you have to have in mind when you're hearing the shofar, when you're blowing the shofar, that you're doing this l'shem mitzvah. If you just hear the shofar without having that in mind, then you would have to hear it again. It's because you didn't have a mind to be yotze the mitzvah. So that's from the gay of mitzvah min ha-Torah. Mitzvah min ha-Torah, you have to have a mind to be yotze the mitzvah. However, the Rebbe says that a mitzvah midrabanon, a mitzvah which is not a mitzvah min ha-Torah, like a mitzvah of Sefiras Haomer, which we learned 2 weeks ago that the mitzvah of Sefiras Haomer bisman hazeh nada, we don't have a beis hamikdash, it's only a mitzvah midrabanon. So a mitzvah of Sefiras Haomer or other mitzvahs that are midrabanan, if one does them and he's not aware that he's doing a mitzvah. So there the Alter Rebbe holds that there's opinions that say that in such a case, even though when it comes to mitzvah min ha-Torah, there are different opinions, when it comes to mitzvah midrabanan, everybody would agree that if you did a mitzvah, even if you weren't aware, didn't have the intention to fulfill the mitzvah, nevertheless the mitzvah was fulfilled and you were yotze the mitzvah. So therefore, that's one principle. Another principle is Shemeya Ko'ina. In halacha, there's many times when you hear something, it's as if you're actually saying it. So when it comes to, one example is, if somebody is middle of Shemoneh Esrei, and he can't answer Kedusha, so he could be quiet, or hearing the Megillah, a more simpler example, when you're hearing the Megillah, so even though not everybody is reading the Megillah, one person is reading, other people are hearing, but everybody is yotze by listening in. One of the ways of understanding that is based on the principle of Shemeya Ko'ina. When hearing somebody else saying it, even though you're not saying it, but it's as if you're saying it. So therefore, when you put both things together, when you hear somebody else saying Sefira, so although you're not saying Sefira, but when you hear the other person saying Sefira, it's Shemeya Ko'ina, it's as if you're saying it. And then, together with that, you say that if you're saying the Sefira, so although your intention, you don't have to be aware, be conscious, or have the intention to fulfill the mitzvah. So if you were to say Sefira, or hear somebody else saying the Sefira, which halachically is considered as if you're saying it, and you're not thinking that you're saying it because you want to count Sefira, you're just saying tonight is such and such, or you hear somebody else counting Sefira, not having a mind to be yotze with his counting. But nevertheless, when you're hearing it from him, or you're saying it, it's as if you're saying it. If you're saying it, you're saying it. If you're hearing it from him, as if you're saying it yourself. And even though you're not having mind to be yotze, you're yotze. So without you having to have that in mind. So therefore, without realizing it, it's very easily we're yotze the mitzvah, and you wouldn't be able now to say count again. You're able to count again Sefira as many times as you want. but you wouldn't be able to count over again Sfira with a bracha, because you can't make a bracha on the mitzvah that you already did, if you was those mitzvahs that are a one-time thing that you do for that day. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe says, if somebody asks you what Sfira is, don't tell them tonight is such and such if you didn't count Sfira yet. Tell them the last week was such and such. As if you'll say tonight and such and last night was such and such. If you were going to say that tonight is such and such, so then if you didn't have a ma'ariv yet, even though you're not thinking anything while you're saying it, just to answer the guy's question, but nevertheless, it's as if you counted Sfira, because you counted Sfira. You don't have to have a mind that you're counting it for a mitzvah. So you said tonight is such and such, you just counted Sfira right there and then. So the same thing would be if you're sitting in a shul in a minyan. Not in a minyan, you're sitting in a shul and you hear somebody else counting Sfira, you hear a chazan counting Sfira. So then what happened is that automatically you would have been yotze with that, because by hearing them counting, and it's as if you're counting, and once you counted, you counted. However, the only way of avoiding it is if one clearly has a mind, as the person is saying it, or as he's hearing it, or as he is saying it, he has a mind, I don't want to be yotze with this Sfira. Then, in such a case where you're clearly intending not to be yotze, so then you're not yotze, because all we say is that you don't have to have a mind to be yotze, you don't have to have a weird that you're being yotze the mitzvah of Sfira. But if you clearly negate that, you clearly say, I don't want to be yotze, so then by counting the Sfira with having that in mind, then obviously you're not yotze the mitzvah of Sfira. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe says, so that's one thing, if you're hearing Sfira from somebody else, have that in mind. You should have that in mind, that you clearly don't want to be yotze when the other person is counting Sfira. However, Alter Rebbe explains, even if a person doesn't clearly have that in mind, but if it's clear that that's what his intention is, if it's clear that his intention is that he doesn't want to be yotze. For example, somebody's asking somebody else what Sfira is tonight, or as the same thing would be if you're in a minyan and you're just about to count Sfira, and the chazan is saying the chazan is counting Sfira. So in such a case, you're hearing the Sfira you're just about to count Sfira yourself. So even though you're not thinking, I don't want to be yotze with the chazan Sfira, but what you are thinking is that I want to count Sfira right now. In order for you to count Sfira right now, obviously that means that you're not interested in being yotze with what the chazan is saying. So if you're asking somebody else, what's tonight's Sfira? Or you're davening with the chayre, the same thing would apply if you're davening with the minyan, and the chazan is counting Sfira, and you're going to follow the chazan and count Sfira with the bracha right after him. In such a case, we don't say that because you heard the Sfira you were yotze, because at the time you're listening to the Sfira, you're clearly aware of the fact that you're about to count Sfira yourself. So it's as if you're clearly intending not to be yotze with whatever Sfira you're hearing. However, if somebody's not in the middle of davening, he's not about to count Sfira, he's just sitting in the shul, and he hears Sfira from another minyan. Or if somebody asks him what's tonight's Sfira, and he tells him what the Sfira is, although yes, he does in the back of his mind, he knows that he wants to still have a ma'ariv and count Sfira, but at that moment, he's not aware of the fact that he is counting the Sfira. At that moment, he's not aware of the fact that he's not consciously thinking, I'm about to count Sfira now. If you would ask him, yes, he would say, I want to count Sfira later, but it's not in his mind at the moment that he's focusing on counting Sfira now, that we should be able to say that it's as if he doesn't, that because he's so focused and aware of him about the fact that he's about to count Sfira now, that it should be considered as if he's clearly having in mind not to be yotze with what he is saying, or with what he's going to hear the chazan saying. So that's one thing I just wanted to clarify. There's another halacha which I skipped last week that was brought to my attention that I will learn now, which is the Alter Rebbe points out that after Sfira we say that the Alter Rebbe writes in Shulchan Aruch, he say, Hi ratzon sheibona beis hamikdash. The nusach that we have in our Sidurim is that Harachmanu yachzor lanu avodas beis hamikdash lemikayim meirav yameinu amin tzara, that Hashem should return the avodah in the beis hamikdash speedily in our days. So this is usually when you daven, you don't have this prayer coming up very often. So the Alter Rebbe explains the reason why we say it is since Sefiras Haomer that we say these days is only a zeichel hamikdash, is only commemorating what took place in the Beis Hamikdash, And when we're counting now, it's kilo, we're not really doing anything mitzvah because we don't have an omer to what to count, we're just doing what they did then, to commemorate the fact that they counted then to the omer. So therefore, we daven the Beis Hamikdash should be built, and we should be able to fulfill the mitzvah properly. The same thing as Al Derech Zeh is also the reason it says why at the end of davening do you say Yiratzin Shibana Beis Hamikdash Shemei Rav Yameinu. Why after Shemoneh Esrei do you say it also in the morning before Hoidu you say Shibana Beis Hamikdash? What's the connection? So let's explain that davening is b'makom karbonos. Shachris Mincha Ma'ariv is b'makom karbonos. So since davening is b'makom karbonos in place of karbonos, so what we said was only Neshama Farim Sfoseinu. When we say davening, so our words of our lips have the effect that it's as if we're bringing a carbon, but it's still not the real thing. So that's why at the end of davening we say that the Beis Hamikdash should be built, and then we'll be able to bring karbonos, and in our davening, we wouldn't just be words, we'll actually have the karbonos. The same thing is B'negeya, if I remember correctly, B'negeya, the Hiratzin that we say in the morning, it's also after Yizom Mekayim and all that about the karbonos, it's Achana to davening, whatever it is, we're also mentioning that we should have the Beis Hamikdash and we should have the Avodah B'Poel Mamish. So that's why by Sefiras Haomer, which the whole mitzvah is to commemorate something which we can't do now, but Poel, or in a certain sense, our mitzvah is really not a mitzvah because we're not counting to anything tangible that was there. So therefore, we ask Sheibana Beis Hamikdash. And Alter Rebbe says that also the people add the Mizmer Lakim Chanenim V'Archeinu on the B'Chayich Rebbeinu Shalom. This is all up in Kabbalah, the connected the Kavanah which is brought down in Siddur that each day represents one word of the Mizmer Lakim Chaneinu, one letter of the Yismuch, one of Anu B'Choyach, one word of Anu B'Choyach, and one Sfira of the 49 Sfiras. So we're saying the Rebbeinu Shalom. Fine. Another thing, just to recap what we spoke about at the end of last week, is regarding the fact that Alter Rebbe says that one should not have a meal before Sefiras Haomer. And Alter Rebbe is speaking about those people that used to daven Ma'ariv early. So since they used to daven Ma'ariv early, so that during the whole year they would daven Ma'ariv when it was still daylight. And then they would rely on those opinions that hold they could just learn Krishma before you go to sleep, and you could eat before and everything else, although usually not supposed to eat before Krishma, things like that. But nevertheless, in the days of Sfira, they're not allowed to start a meal a half hour before Sfira. Alter Rebbe writes, however, if you have a shamish, they used to have in those days, the people used to go around on the doors reminding people when it's time to daven Ma'ariv, Shacharis, whatever it might be, wake them up in the morning. So you used to also go around and count and tell them that it's time to count Sfiras. If you have a shamish that's going to come to remind you, you're allowed to rely on that. So there was the discussion that I mentioned, that there's a discussion amongst the Achronim where whether a person, if it helps, Bizman Hazef, a person appoints a Shem, a person appoints somebody to remind them to count Sfira, is he allowed to start a meal and before he counts Sfira, relying on the fact that he'll have somebody reminding him to count Sfira. So technically, one consideration is, as Alter Rebbe says here in Shulchan Aruch, that counting Sfira is not a big deal. All you need is just to get up and count Sfira, and then you would be able to eat. So if so, why should one have to wait, say, okay, I'll eat now, and I'll point a Sherman to remind me to count Sfira? Let him just go and count Sfira. What is he waiting for? But with Poel Mamish, we don't just count Sfira in the middle of nowhere. We do it in Ma'ariv before Aleinu. So therefore, a person, I guess, to Bizman Hazeh, for whatever reason, he's waiting for a minion that he has, whatever it might be, that he is waiting to daven to count Sfira together with the minion. So then the question is, would it help for him to make a shemer to remind him to count Sfira? So the svara that Moshe brings down, the Achronim bring, is that if when it comes to Ma'ariv, to davening Ma'ariv, which also you're not supposed to eat a meal before you daven Ma'ariv, but if you're relying on those Ateirim that will rely on a shemer, on somebody reminding you, making sure that you daven Ma'ariv, B'chlal, as you rely on him the same way you rely on him during all the days of the year, they're allowed to daven Ma'ariv relying on the shemer. So the same thing would be regarding Sfira. If you rely on it when it comes to Sfira, you rely on it when it comes to Maitiv, so you should be able to rely on it when it comes to Sfira. Why is Maitiv more stricted than Sfira? For Krishma and Shemon Esrei, relying on the Shem, you should be able to rely on him for Sfira. Elamai, the Alter Rebbe is saying, from the Alter Rebbe's mashma, you can't rely on a Shem. He only says you can rely on a Shemer to start a meal a half hour before the Zman. But once the Zman comes, you can't rely on a Shemer. But here again, the Alter Rebbe is speaking about somebody that already daven Maitiv. So therefore, if you're already daven Maitiv, first of all, once the Zman comes, so there's no reason for him to rely on a Shemer, let him just count Sfira. Anyway, there's no reason, he's not waiting to daven Maitiv and then count Sfira. But if somebody's anyway relying, he's going to daven Maitiv later and he's relying on whatever tatum that they have, meaning Kavua, or he has a Shemer, so you can't really be medayek from the Alter Rebbe either way, because the Alter Rebbe is only being matyu to rely, when the Alter Rebbe, the mashmos of the Alter Rebbe, they could only rely on a Shemer the half hour before, to start from the half hour before. It's speaking about somebody that are already daven Maitiv anyway, and all he needs is to count Sfira. So once his man comes, there's nothing stopping him from just counting Sfira. But Bisman has said that a person counts that most people, the people that daven Maitiv after Zman, so if they're relying on a Shemer to count Maitiv after to daven Maitiv after the Zman L'choira, they should be able to rely on the Shemer also for Sfira. That's one way of looking at it, and not a Rav. But I just wanted to point that out, that that from the Alter Rebbe, people want to be medayek the Alter Rebbe, you can't rely on the Shem. You can only rely on the Shem within the half hour before. But again, Alter Rebbe is not talking about somebody that's anybody relying on the Shemer for Sfira, for Maitiv. If any relying on the Shemer for Maitiv, so Sfira shouldn't be any worse. And befrat, that if you're already daven Maitiv and you're relying on the Shemer, so then there's so then technically all you need to do, it would make no sense to rely on a Shemer, because what's stopping you from just counting Sfira once this man comes? What's stopping you from counting from counting Sfira? But you have to rely on a Shemer once this man comes. So in whatever, just pointing that out for discussion purposes, we get this thing. Okay, we'll stop here. We'll continue next week in Mitzvah Shem.